Do you hate running out of stamina and getting stun locked for so long that your face gets kicked in by small mobs? There's no lie that early game stamina management during combat in Enshrouded isn't the most fun to deal with. But what if I told you there's a way to pretty much never run out of stamina while you're fighting enemies? Now you'll be free to try out all those fun abilities in the skill tree that cost stamina too. So what is this magic pill that's going to transform your character into a tireless battle maniac? Well, it's not really a magic pill so much as a rock. No, not that one. The shiny magical gemstone kind that you slot into your weapon. That kind of rock. Specifically, the Gem of Agility. The way this one works is that every time you roll or blink, you get a timed buff that grants you bonus cutting damage, but more importantly, a set number of stamina points back after landing your attack, based on what level the gem is currently at. You can tell if the buff window is active in two ways. The first and most obvious tell is that the name of the gem shows up at the top left corner of the screen, just under your health and mana bars. The second, more subtle hint that it's active is that after you evade, you'll notice a faint windy aura surrounding your character that disappears immediately after attacking an enemy. Without having to look at the top left corner of the screen, it lets you know that it's active while your focus stays on your character and target in the heat of the moment. You can find this gem in set locations throughout the world, starting at levels 16 and 18. They each give you a 33 and 35 point return on stamina. At the highest level, you can reach a whopping 71 points that get replenished. To put that into perspective, the skill node with the highest stamina cost is the Whirlwind Crescendo at 75 stamina points. In theory, this means that you can get most of your stamina points back if you activate the gem ability shortly after that attack. Now that we know a little bit about what our little blue-tiered crystal of speed can do, where do we get one? Both level 16 and 18 versions of this gem can be found after defeating certain banshees in fixed locations in the Nomad Highlands. Though the chance for these gems to drop seems pretty high, there are times where the gem may not drop. In that case, you'll have to stay at least 600 meters away from the zone so the banshees can respawn. As a prerequisite, you'll have to have unlocked this zone by upgrading your flame to level 4 to get these gems, but that comes at a fairly early point compared to how much more content and character levels are left in the game. The level 18 gem can be found in the Elixir well just south of Umber Hollow, on one of the banshees that spawn just on top of the flame altar checkpoint. But honestly, if you're wanting one as soon as possible, the level 16 one is quick to obtain as soon as your flame is at level 4. There's also a gem forge and shroud lair with the materials you need to upgrade it conveniently close. First, we're gonna teleport to the ancient spire in Low Meadows, and then jump off. Not that far down. Glide on down to the road leading to the Elixir well. At the end of the road, there should be a shack to the left with 3 banshees. At least one of them will have a high chance of dropping the gem. Now that you've gotten a hold of the gem, it's time to upgrade this bad boy. Head up northeast on the map, beneath the plains and into the caverns. There, you might come across the Gem Forge while you perform the upgrade, but first, we need to make our way into the Shroud Lair for the Archaic Essence, the upgrade material for the gem. It's a short walk east of the Gem Forge. You're going to want to obtain about 560 of these little glowers to reach the max of what the forge nearby can do, which gets your gem to about level 20. If you didn't know this already, you can whip your pickaxe out and dig up any yellow glowing spots on the ground for Archaic Essence as well. After your short bout of plundering the caves for essence, make your way back to the Gem Forge. You're now ready to upgrade your gem. Congratulations, you now have a level 20 gem, which nets you about 38 stamina points on activation. Now that your initiation is over and you've been made a fully fledged member of the Gem of Agility cult, let's take a look at a couple of the craziest ways we can abuse it. Perhaps one of the best skills to pair with this gem is the Crashdown attack for its crowd control. Despite its high cost for heavier weapons, this works phenomenally in places with higher enemy density, like the Hollow Halls. Enemies caught in its area of effect become stunned for about half a second while also cancelling out their attack animations. Due to the nature of this skill's area of effect, the activation of the gem seems to return stamina based on the number of enemies hit. This means you can effectively spam the Crashdown attack and regain all the stamina spent as long as there's a group to land on. There is one drawback to this skill though. After landing the attack on the ground, animation end lag sets in, preventing you from doing anything else until it finishes. This could potentially leave you open for faster enemies to attack you. However, for the majority of the game, up until the game's most recent biome, enemy attacks windups are very slow and projected, so this won't be a problem for much of the early game. Psst. I'm going to teach you a special trick you can do to mitigate the end lag. This first tip's completely free. After landing, you can cut the animation lock short by attacking very soon after you hit the ground. If the need arises, you can also immediately cancel the attack by dodging. Here's a side-by-side comparison. There's about a half-second difference right there. That might not seem like much on paper, but that split moment could be the deciding factor on whether or not you escape an untimely death. When it comes to pairing the upward slash attack with the Gem of Agility, this skill has an interesting use case. Beyond the standard application on airborne enemies, as its description suggests, you can also hit more than one enemy with this attack, and that'll restore stamina based on how many receive damage. The hitbox works in a narrow range in front of the attack, making it a smaller area of effect than the Crashdown attack. However, this skill is both faster to perform with virtually no end lag, as well as cheap on stamina compared to the Crashdown. It can be a solid strategy to use on grounded enemies, as you'll likely regain stamina spent on both gem and skill activation if you hit at least 2 enemies. Overall, this skill paired with the gem makes for a nice secondary crowd control option to keep in your back pocket, and maybe even a primary means if you can learn its hitbox well. If you also spec into the Crashdown skill, even if you manage to hop over enemies and miss the attack, that means the buff could still be active, and the follow-up Crashdown might be able to recoup the stamina with enough enemies around. This next skill might be the very best one to pair with the gem, for just how useful and reliable it is. Despite not having the same level of crowd control as the last two skills, the Evasion Attack's value comes in both how cheap on stamina it is, and just how fast and far the skill takes you. It works great for closing the gap on enemies as long as you have even ground. When it comes to using this skill in tandem with the Gem of Agility, just like the Crashdown and upward slash attacks, you'll also regain stamina for every enemy that you hit. You could even potentially restore your stamina to full if you're lucky enough to hit that many enemies, or upgrade the gem close enough to max level. What's this? Another tip? Well, yes indeed it is. If you unlock your targeting and turn your character away from the enemy while third-person view is still facing them, and then use the skill, you'll cover a very large distance. Look at how far you go. You become a literal speed demon. But wait, there's more. Before we get into that though, if you're liking the video so far, drop it a like. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel if you want more. Alright, here's the final tip for this skill. Similarly to the Crashdown attack, you can animation cancel out of the end lag of this attack, but this time you can also block. I find that blocking is preferable to attacking, as it can even net you a potential parry. Both come out at the same speed though, so the choice is yours. Just look at the difference with and without the cancel. Pretty insane, right? The Evasion Attack, Upward Slash, and Crashdown skills paired with the Gem of Agility make for a melee player's bread and butter. We'll go over some of the other available skills that stand to benefit from the stamina the gem provides, but I find that these 3 skills make the most of the gem's capabilities. They also come fairly early on in the skill tree, with Crashdown costing 4 points total to reach, Evasion Attack costing 7, and Upward Slash Attack costing 9 skill points at a minimum, or 10 if you go down the route that also unlocks the Crashdown skill. This makes them very accessible choices. Adding in the Gem of Agility just guarantees that you'll be able to use these attacks consistently without having to worry about stamina, which can be hard to come by in the earlier stages of the game. Despite being placed early on in the skill tree at a price of 5 skill points, the Giant Slayer hook costs a hefty 50 stamina points to perform, making it less viable to constantly use against single targets, at least until you can get your gem leveled near max. Since use of this skill on its own does not count for triggering the gem's stamina regen effect, your next attack will trigger the buff instead. If the enemy you're grappling to is tall enough, you can pair the crash down or upward slash attacks with it into a crowd to recoup the stamina cost. This combination makes for a nice tool for you to control how much space you want between yourself and the enemies. Grounding hook works similarly to the upward slash attack, being specifically useful for flying enemies. Since it pulls them directly to you, it's a much more reliable skill than the upwards attack for that particular use. The trade-off for that reliability, however, comes with a heftier cost of stamina at 50 points per activation. This skill, like the Giant Slayer hook, also does not trigger the gem, so you'll have to follow it up with an attack. In terms of what this skill in combination with the gem bring to the table, there doesn't seem to be too much synergy between the two. Unlike the Giant Slayer hook, this skill doesn't really bring you into groups of enemies to allow you to regain the stamina needed to activate both the gem and skill. Unless you upgrade the gem to compensate those stamina costs, this one won't be too consistent. As mentioned earlier, Whirlwind Crescendo costs a whopping 75 points to perform, on top of having to spend stamina on evading. Here's where the first real issue of this skill arises. If you can somehow manage to not land the first 2 attacks to save the buff for the final AoE swipe, for some reason, that attack does not restore chunks of stamina per enemy hit. The second issue with this skill lies in the fact that it's performed at the end of a combo that could be interrupted, resetting you back to the start. It honestly feels like more trouble than it's worth to build a playstyle around the gem with this skill when the first 2 skills mentioned make far better use of said gem. That being said, it's not completely unusable, so much as a secondary choice for attacks to use around the Gem of Agility. Another thing to note about this ability is that it's locked to heavy weapons, making it niche to the set of players that make use of that weapon type only. It's also very far down the skill tree, making it inaccessible until later in the game. The archery-based tree doesn't have too many skills that make use of the Gem of Agility's stamina regenerative capabilities, aside from beasting. Though decent on its own, and potentially even having room for some creative applications, like using it to delay a crashdown, the beasting skill might not make for the most practical style of play to be building around the gem. Despite this, having stamina regen from the gem can be very useful in the early game for bow users, since using stamina to space oneself from enemies is pretty integral to the playstyle. In the same vein, despite there being no skills pertaining to stamina, having stamina regen for magic playstyles is useful for set spacing. In early game, magic style players can even opt to pair the Gem of Agility with a wand to enable a highly effective resource-free combat playstyle. All in all, the playstyle that seems to scale the best with the Gem of Agility is melee, with the Evasion Attack, Upward Slash, and Crashdown skills making the most of its stamina regeneration capabilities. However, players of all styles can stand to benefit in the early game from using this gem, as it makes stamina management much simpler and consistent. For late game, this gem paired with more stamina skills, armor, and food or potion buffs make it so that you never need to worry about managing stamina again, giving you a virtually unlimited supply with the levels of stamina regeneration that you can reach. What do you think about having great stamina sustain? And do you think there are more unique and creative ways to utilize the gem that I could have missed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And to everyone returning to the channel, thank you so much for tuning in again. Your support is hugely appreciated, and it motivates me to keep working on videos. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.